In this video, I'm going to talk about two scenarios when preparing for a job interview might not be the best investment of your time. And the first scenario here would be when you decide to start your preparation 2 days before the interview in the context of when you got invited 2 weeks ago. Okay, so long story short, it's impossible to develop your interviewing skills in 2 days, right? And it's actually quite dangerous to have such an approach, primarily for two reasons. The first one is if you start your interview prep the day or 2 days before your interview, your stress levels will significantly increase, especially when you realize that your answers are so-so, right? And the problem with this is that your attitude and your stress levels do show during a job interview. And for someone who's doing this for a living, you'll be surprised how easy it is to read candidates for such things. And the second reason why this is dangerous, if you start your preparation the night before the interview, especially if you're preparing for a final interview round, or let's say 4 1-hour rounds, your performance will be impacted during your interviews. And this will actually play a role in your ability to listen during that job interview. So long story short, your performance will decrease if you do this the night before your interview. Notice here I said the context is everything, that if you had 2 weeks to prepare, however, if you're getting invited for that interview on short notice, then of course, the story changes because also the expectations change from your interviewing company. And there's also one other exception to this, is that people with exceptional CVs and people who know they are really good with interviewing. Okay, so if you're really good at interviewing and your CV allows, then you might not need to prepare to pass that job interview. But even so, if you decide to prepare, you might benefit from that in the sense of a better negotiation in terms of salary, and even to get up-leveled, right? So in my experience, this does actually happen, okay? And the second scenario, which I believe is quite interesting for many candidates, is I usually advise to prepare intense interviews using a story bank. And preparing a story bank can be a pretty lengthy process, especially if your interviewing skills are not particularly good. So what happens here is that there's a critical moment in preparing a story bank, a chasm. Whereas if once you reach that critical moment, then you're going to start feeling more empowered because your answers will significantly improve. However, if you stop before that critical moment, if you go with a half-prepared story bank, then actually your answers might sound even worse than if you did not prepare. And I'd like to give a quick example here. So for instance, if you brainstorm for a story in its first version, you try to think of all the details you can remember about that story. The first version might not be, of course, the best version, but could be a pretty decent story, could be really an intelligible one. And from experience, first versions of your stories score pretty good on clarity of thought, even if they're longer. But then you realize that your story lacks metrics, lacks a template such as the STAR template, and you decide to do a second revision to include those metrics and that template. And your second version, because of the fact that it's, you have to fit into a certain template or mold or however that's called, might not actually sound as good as the first one on things such as clarity of thought. It might be outright ambiguous, because you had to fit all those elements, and might not sound good, right? And then it's only starting at the third revision that your story will start improving. In most cases, it actually start to significantly improve. But long story short here, if you decide to stop your preparation at the second revision of your interview answers, then they will sound pretty ambiguous, even if they're already in the STAR format. And if you compare an ambiguous answer with metrics with an unambiguous, with an answer which scores pretty good on clarity of thought but is longer and unstructured, it's always the clarity of thought which will win for the purpose of job interview, right? So again, half preparing your story bank, okay, can be a dangerous approach here. Or another very common example is for people to spend 1 week writing their stories without ever rehearsing them, without ever role-playing them. That's also another super dangerous approach. With, in some cases, actually in many cases, it's a huge difference between a written and spoken type of answer. Okay, so these are the types of scenarios of half-baked stories and story banks in general that you really want to pay particular attention to. So again, the best rule to know when your story bank is ready is once you pass that chasm, that critical chasm, once you feel, like your answers are really good and you feel empowered to interview better. So these would be the two scenarios that I believe you should pay particular attention to for the context of a job interview. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.